All right, we are back with another episode of Literary Dialogues, and today I'm going to ask Dr. Anand Prakash a very relevant question that is to do with literature, and that is, what is the role of literature in life?
Well, literature generally is supposed to be a part of culture, and unless there is culture in society, the society doesn't live, doesn't breathe, doesn't feel nice. So that kind of sense of being a human being, sense of being sensitive, sense of being friendly, sweet, tolerant. Listen to the difference of opinion as appreciatively as you talk. So all these things are not there in society to the extent they should be, and therefore literature should be activated in order to become more a part of culture, more a part of tolerance, more a part of appreciating every other human being, and spreading the message of peace and friendship. That's what literature should do.
So, would you consider the written text as literature, or do you also consider the cinematic representations these days? You see, why I ask this question is because these days a lot of people have moved away from reading, so to speak, and they have entered into the domain of watching shows on Netflix and other OTT platforms. So, reading has been replaced by watching in that sense. Do you think they are the same?
You see, I mentioned the word culture. So they are both definitely an integral part of culture. But literature as a specific, aspect of life, aspect of expression, is word-centric.
Yes.
So language should be in fact used as a means to understand society better. And when you also see the language being replaced by picture or an image on the screen, as in the case of Netflix and all, that I think adds to the intensity of life and culture.
Sure.
And the intensity of the felt experience also.
Felt experience
and enriches the word that is there on the page.
But my point is that, you see, I want to understand this, that people are not reading these days. Do you see it as a problem that people are not reading? Do you think that the world that is provided to us in a book form through language has a lot of insights or has a lot of meanings hidden in language? Do you think that they don't become available then?
I think language cannot be replaced, nor can music or the image can be replaced. They should in fact be combined, because sometimes you see a better image of society through language, and sometimes language is enriched when it also carries the aspect of picture.
I for one feel that when you're reading, then you are on your own pace. It's a self-paced thing. While when you're watching a show or anything, then you are guided by how fast the director wants you to go through something, right? And you tend to go with that flow and that pace, and maybe that doesn't give you time to chew the cud. Maybe you don't have time enough to reflect. In a book, you want to go back and forth, and you want to look for your own meanings, and you're intrigued by a character, and then you add your own colors to that picture that is provided to you on the page. In many ways, I feel reading is, when you read a text, then there is the active reader involved who's constantly creating a movie in the head. So you are in fact a participant in that world that is created half by the writer. But when you go to watch these things, there is a lot of thrill, there is too much of stimulus available on the screen, and that in a way does not allow you to think so much critically, or does not allow you to reflect at your own pace. Would you agree with something like this?
This might happen, yes, and this happens many a time. And in these days, when so much of money, so much of effort is invested in the making of films, then films have already overtaken a large part of the literary expression. But then literature is at the center of the film. Literature is at the center of the narrative, in the form of the narrative, and writers are needed, poets are needed to contribute their might to the making of the image. So these things will keep on working, interacting with one another. Maybe today it's the world of film, and tomorrow it's going to be back to the world of writing, because there you have the ideas much more concretely, then they can be contained in the picture.
Right. And just to go back to then literature as such, and literature and life. What do you think is your view regarding literature and life? Do you think that literature mirrors society?
It is a reflection of life, because when you are facing a page, then actually you are not looking at the page, you are looking through the words on the page at the society in which you live. So there is a kind of dimension that is added, that is the dimension of language, but actually you get back to society, and because the writer is talking about society directly or indirectly. So these things are in a way mysterious, they look mysterious, and they should look also mysterious, because they tend to raise more questions than they answer. And today, words I believe cannot be replaced by an image, because words connect you with what happened 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, what people thought about things, when the same word was used there. So words have a history. Now this history cannot be easily captured through film.
But do you also think that in literature or in these fictional worlds that are created by a writer, we actually have we get to see experiences of other selves, a self that I might have been, and and the choices made by individuals, which in a way take us closer to the rational principle and make us also look at our own choices, for instance, that we have made in life and where they have taken. When we compare them with the characters in novels, for instance, then we seem to have an idea about how life works, how emotions work, how structures operate in society, how the dynamic of relationships take shape, say, in lives. So something which we may not become conscious of in our own lives, but when it is provided in the form of the text, there is a distance that occurs between us and that world which is there in the book, and that world in a way gives us a picture of life. But then because there is a distance between the text and our own life, we are able to see it better. We are able to see the experience, the dynamics involved in relationships, people's choices, how they behave and their tendencies, etc. We are able to analyze life better through the written text. Do you think so?
Actually, you are raising lots of theoretical questions in your statement, because in reflection there is an issue, and then this issue is discussed in criticism also. And reconstructing life, reflecting life, talking about life, using a word in order to send a message across to the society. All these things have been covered by literary theory in the last 50 years or so. But the point that you are making is correct, that literature has to be produced in society, in a society that is either appreciative or is not exactly appreciative, and therefore something should be done about the circumstances that come between literature and life as a whole. So these things have to be considered by writers in individual cases and at the general level of a literary stream that exists in front of us.
Yes, I'm going to catch you on that word that you use, reflection and reconstruction. So is literature a reflection or a reconstruction of life, and what is the difference?
If you want me to tell the difference is that reflection is actually there, which doesn't have that kind of dynamism which is there in actual life. It reflects, it's a kind of a mirror, and in the mirror what is happening elsewhere is just shown. So that way it becomes somewhat problematic. But if you see reflection as something that reminds you of the struggles that were captured while reflecting it, then the scene changes. Then there are 2 levels, 3 levels that work, and one of them is reflection. The other is also reconstruction, because when you reflect, you don't reflect everything. You exercise a choice, and when you exercise a choice, through that choice some kind of construction is made.
I'm just trying to understand how far is literature from life, in the sense, one, life exists and has its own dynamism, as you say, and the second thing is that this is then processed in the mind of the writer, and when the writer processes this data around him, so to speak, or her, you find that the writer chooses to project certain episodes from life, and not just chooses but also is governed by one's sense of those things, how I perceive reality. So the writer's perception of reality is then projected in the literary work. It may not be the reality, it is the writer's, where the writer stands in society, right? And the kind of experiences that that writer has had. So from those specific experiences and where the writer stands in society, the writer projects, constructs reality or perceives reality, and then constructs it in a manner, in an aesthetic manner, for the literary work that we finally get.
Since you are compelling me to differentiate between life and literature, I would definitely agree with you and say that in reality, as you call it, in life that is, there's no beginning or there's no ending. You know, something begins, you know, in history when
Right.
you go back 5,000 years. You go back to the 19th century, you go back to the early 20th century, you have a beginning. That beginning is conscious, isn't it? Life doesn't have this kind of consciousness. So that is provided by the writer oneself.
So the writer provides certainty, because everything else is uncertain,
Yes,
right?
yes,
In
yes.
life, the next day is uncertain. In life, death is uncertain. But the writer, when one writes and commits to the page, provides a certain world, right? A world that is stable, a world that has a beginning and an end, you know, and everything is in a way guided, and there is a sense of certainty that literature provides.
Literature is artificial in the sense, you know, that it imposes on the
It is a
reader.
part of art.
It's a part of art.
How would it not be artificial?
Artificial. Oh yes.
Yes, that's right. Because, you know, in art there has to be some kind of concreteness, and concreteness is not there in life. And,
If literature is artificial, then literature is not a reflection of life.
well, yes, and then, you know, because the part of life that is reflected in literature actually is a part of choice. It is a part of the construction also, because the way writers saw the things in front of him or her, those things don't exactly appear to be so on the page. So because they don't appear to be so the writer has done some effort.
Effort.
So, you know, this in a way brings me to one more point that I wanted to ask in this our discussion on what is really literature. That the writer's perspective, right? When we say the writer reconstructs and sees things, you know, if a writer comes from a lower middle class background, if a writer is an elitist, if a writer is a diasporic writer, for instance, in India, do you think the perspective in a way determines the kind of writing or you're writing?
Not be more right, because the most important thing in literature is perspective. Your standpoint from that angle from where you look at reality.
But that angle is also very partial. You see, it's like, let's take the example of a room, for instance. I have a view of the room, but I don't see the wall behind me, right? And that is where I stand in this room. So in society also, I stand somewhere where certain things are unavailable to me. Certain things are literally on the back wall. So I have no access to them. So do you think that that makes literature in a way subjective and not objective?
Both. Because it's subjective in the sense that people would like to judge you from the way you chose your angle and presented things from there, which means you had a choice and you made the right choice according to you. So the critic can catch you, isn't it? The writer can be caught by the critic because that's the angle, and you rightly said middle class angle. So middle class angle is a middle class perspective. There can be a lower class angle, and then there will be a lower class perspective. Maybe the exploitation, the economic, you know, injustice that happens in society cannot be captured if you belong to the upper class in terms of perspective.
Because probably you have no access to that reality. For you, the reality is just probably the elite circles that you are a part of. I want to ask a related question here. If I mean, we speak of the stand that the writer, where does the writer stand in society, and that is what constitutes one's perspective, how one looks at reality, or what is one's point of view. Now, if you are from a lower middle class family and you write from that perspective, then you have a different reality to project. If you come from the elite circles of life, then you have a different kind of view of life, and you will pick up different concerns as important in life. That is one thing that we've discussed. The second is, do you think a writer can belong to a particular class and still have a perspective that may not belong to his class?
Absolutely. That's not only possible, that actually is indicative of a large part of literature. Because there are people who belong to the upper class, but when they started writing, when they were at the table, then they were looking at the society from a different perspective than their own perspective in the social life.
Do you have any examples in
mind? Well, one famous example is of the 19th century realists in France, like Balzac. And Balzac was quoted as by some thinkers of the time as saying that he became a different person when he sat at the table. Then he became so disinterested in that royalty which he put his faith in, that he started ridiculing that class which he hated. That is the merchant class. In literature, he hated the class of royals, right. Royalty.
But in actual life, he was in favor of that.
Actual life, he was in favor of it. Mm-hmm. In fact, he would always, dress himself as a gentleman, as a kind of a lord with cane in hand and moving around and showing off. But when he came to writing, then he was a different person altogether. So therefore, this phrase was coined in the 19th century that in Balzac is not the writer, he is only the secretary of history.
So basically, you mean to say that secretary of history would actually mean somebody who's very objective, right? That you are just taking down notes. So he seemed to have an objective view of life and not share his personal, not let his personal ideologies or personal faith or belief system enter his writing. Yeah. Do you think a genuine writing, or do you think any good literature is supposed to do that?
I think so, because when you take negative characters and see some humanity in them, now that's not common in life. But the writer is able to see that this person also is a human being, and if he or she has some distortions, those distortions are not involved. They are there in society, and that way you start then appreciating the villains in literature much more clearly than otherwise in life. So most of the idea of the villain hero is there in Shakespeare, and the more brutal the person was, the more human he became in certain situations in life. So this is what great writers do all the time. So 19th century realists, Shakespeare in the 17th, 16th century, and in fact everywhere, when you are a humanist, when you are a humanist rationalist, then you see that reality is one. It is reflected in so many different ways in literature, and that the more objective you are, the better you are able to capture those distortions that otherwise are seen as a kind of illness. They are illnesses, but when you look at them from a humanistic angle, then they seem to be involved in human beings, taken by the human beings from society, etc., and those dimensions are open before you. And you as a reader should know that we belong to a world which is actually beautiful in potentiality.
Last question that I want to ask is, what do you think literature does to an individual?
Well, yes, I think literature gives a perspective to the individual to understand and sympathize, and in fact even empathize. Generally I don't put myself in the place of the person whom I criticize, but when I write, then I have to not only go under the skin of the person, but also capture his or her voice. So in fact I've been suggesting to fellow writers in my own circle that you should be able to make the characters talk, because when they talk, then it's not your idea, then it's their idea imagined by you. So that is the crux of literature, and this kind of a literature finally spreads the message of empathy, message of equating oneself with others, and to use that phrase, to get under their skin. Mm-hmm. That is what is important.
So we become more human when
more
read.
Human, yes, more understanding, more tolerant, more loving.
Because you then tend to also love these characters and see how these characters are both likable and with maybe their own idiosyncrasies and things that you might dislike about them.
And
Parts, their negative parts don't belong to them. They belong to the society in which they were born. Otherwise, they would be as good or bad as we ourselves are. Sometimes I see my own negative points when I see the negative points happening in the case of the characters that I read about in novels.
When you become more self-critical and
Yes.
in that sense modest also, would you
Yes.
agree?
Yeah, definitely. Modesty is one mark, that all human beings are supposed to wear, in their heart, because modesty means that you are able to relate better.
And that you're also open-ended about things and that you're open to new ideas. I think when you read more literature, then you become more modest, because then you are aware of the various dialectics that may be operating in society.
You become open, you become innocent, like a child. In fact, when you read literature, then you are looking at the world as if from the angle of a child. So the child wonders.
If you want to apply this kind of an anti-aging method, then you should read more literature, yeah, because then you don't age, according to Dr. Anand Prakash. Okay, thank you very much. This is all for today that we have, and we'll come back with more discussions on literatures. Do send us in your comments what you would like us to discuss, and we'll try and take that up. See you. Bye.